Get on the ground. Get on the ground right now. Get down.
Okay, I'm going. I got a disability, sir.
I don't care. Get down. Hands where I can see him.
He's going down, man. He can't move.
Stop resisting.
You bust my head.
I got head problems, man.
On December 15th, 2024, Officer Alton Wall of the Greenwood Police Department in Mississippi drew his weapon the moment he entered the parking lot. There was no command given in measured tones. There was no pause to assess. Wall advanced with his gun leveled at Jeffrey Baskin, 48 years old, disabled, his gait already uneven from an old injury, screaming commands laced with racial slurs to get on the ground. His voice, a blunt instrument cutting through the cold December air. Baskin raised both hands, slowly, palms open, empty. His cousin, Peter Crawford, standing nearby, did the same. Two men attempting compliance against a wall of screamed commands, neither resisting, neither threatening, both visible in every frame of the Bodycam footage that would later become the centerpiece of a departmental investigation. In the 1989 case of Graham versus Connor, the Supreme Court held that the Fourth Amendment requires a police officer's use of force to be reasonable under the circumstances, and identified three factors courts must consider: the severity of the crime at issue, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of officers or others, and whether the suspect is actively resisting arrest or attempting to flee. More recently, in Armstrong versus Village of Pinehurst in 2016, the Fourth Circuit affirmed that even purely passive resistance can support some use of force. But the level of force must be proportional to the factual circumstances of that resistance. In the parking lot outside Greenwood on that December night, the severity of any alleged crime was at best unclear. Baskin posed no immediate threat. His hands were raised and visible, and he was not resisting, he was complying. Under these three factors, it is difficult to construct a legal argument in which what followed next was justified under any standard a court would recognize. Because what followed next was a stomp. Wall brought his foot down onto Baskin's upper back, with enough force to drive the disabled man's head into the pavement. A hard, sickening impact, recorded in full by the Bodycam, witnessed by Crawford from the ground and later described by Sergeant Donovan Brooks in a report that would ultimately end Wall's career and begin his criminal prosecution. If you are ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let's continue. The parking lot was quiet before Wall arrived. December in Greenwood carries a particular kind of cold, still and flat, the kind that settles into concrete and does not lift. A few overhead lights flickered at the lot's edge, casting long, uneven shadows across the asphalt. Jeffrey Baskin and Peter Crawford stood near their vehicle, doing nothing remarkable. Two men in a parking lot. That was the entirety of the predicate. Wall entered the scene with his gun already drawn. There was no de-escalation, no introduction, no measured attempt to establish what, if anything, had occurred. Wall advanced, fast, loud, and certain, his weapon trained on Baskin as the commands and slurs erupted from him in a continuous, undifferentiated stream. The words were not tactical. They were not designed to produce compliance. They were designed to dominate, and layered through them, audible on the Bodycam recording, were racial slurs that stripped the encounter of any pretense that this was simply a matter of officer safety. Baskin moved the only way available to him, slowly, carefully, with the deliberate economy of a man whose body did not cooperate with sudden movements. His hands rose above his head, palms facing outward, the universal signal of submission. Crawford mirrored him. Both men were in the process of lowering themselves to the ground when Wall closed the remaining distance. Baskin's disability made the descent uneven. His knees reached the asphalt first. His hands followed. He was on all fours, head down, complying, when Wall's foot came down. The impact registered in multiple ways simultaneously. There was the physical. Baskin's face met the pavement with a force that split skin and pooled blood beneath his forehead almost instantly. There was the acoustic, a sound captured by the Bodycam that required no enhancement or slowing down to understand. And there was the contextual weight of what had just happened. A uniformed officer had stomped a 48-year-old disabled man into concrete, in response to no resistance whatsoever. Crawford, prone on the ground 6 feet away, absorbed it all from the asphalt. His mind processed what his eyes had just witnessed. He did not move. He did not speak. He waited. Wall continued issuing commands. Emergency services arrived within minutes, drawn to the scene as it stabilized. Baskin remained on the ground, one hand pressed to his forehead, muttering about his head, about existing injuries, about the pavement, about the violence he had just endured and the years of prior damage it had aggravated. He was not dramatic about it. He stated facts. He had head problems. He had been in accidents before. He had come to the lot doing nothing. And they had thrown him down. Wall, in the minutes after, began the other work, the quieter, more calculated work of constructing a justification. To the first colleague who arrived, he offered an explanation built around a perceived gun threat, a claim of non-compliance, a narrative architecture designed to make the stomp legible as something other than what it was. The colleague who arrived first fist-bumped him, offered the word appropriate, agreed, without examination, that the force had been warranted. Sergeant Donovan Brooks arrived and said nothing immediately. Brooks stood at the edge of the scene and took it in. The blood on the concrete, the gap between what he was being told and what the environment suggested, the too easy confidence in Wall's posture as he held court with his early audience. Brooks was not the kind of officer who drew conclusions before he had examined the footage. He was not the kind of officer who filed reports to fit a narrative. He noted the discrepancies and kept them to himself for the moment, in the way that a careful person keeps a match unlit until they understand exactly what is in the room. Somewhere in Baskin's quiet life, the unassuming routine of a disabled man in a small Mississippi city, the daily navigation of a body that no longer moved the way it once had, there were people who knew a version of him that had not been visible in that parking lot. Not the man on the ground, not the man bleeding into the December cold. A different version. One that had learned in a different life entirely how systems of power operated from the inside. That version of Jeffrey Baskin had been watching everything that happened in that lot with a particular kind of attention. But that would come later. For now, Wall received the fist bump and the validation of a colleague who had not yet reviewed the footage. He accepted both with the ease of a man who had not yet considered that the camera on his chest had recorded every second. The blue wall, as it so often does, seemed to be assembling itself around him, brick by quiet brick. What none of them had fully reckoned with yet was Sergeant Brooks, standing at the periphery, watching and waiting to write a report. The report Wall filed that night was a document of invention. It described a suspect who had appeared to reach for a weapon. It claimed that commands to drop the gun had been issued, repeatedly, clearly, urgently. It characterized Baskin's descent to the pavement as something that required physical assistance and described Wall's intervention as a controlled push, a matter of foot placement on the middle of the back, measured and proportional. The report was coherent. It was internally consistent, and it bore almost no relationship to what the Bodycam had recorded. The footage showed Baskin's hands above his head from the moment Wall approached. It showed no gun commands, only the slurs and the order to get down over and over, a loop of aggression, unconnected to any specific threat. It showed the stomp. Not a push, not a placement, but a full downward strike onto the upper back of a man already on his hands and knees. The discrepancy between the written narrative and the visual record was not ambiguous. It was categorical. Peter Crawford, still shaken in the hours that followed, sought accountability the way that citizens in a functional system are told they can, by asking for a business card, a name, a number, something tangible to hold onto in the aftermath of what he had witnessed done to his cousin. Wall told him the department did not issue such cards. The statement was immediate, flat, and false. Sergeant Brooks, standing nearby, corrected it on camera without ceremony. The department did issue cards. Brooks provided one. The exchange was brief, almost unremarkable in its simplicity, and yet it was the first moment in which the official story began to fracture publicly. Witnessed by Crawford, captured by the Bodycam, time-stamped and irreversible. Internally, Wall continued working. He circulated his version among colleagues. The gun he thought he saw, the hands that would not show themselves, the necessity of the force. In departments where the culture runs deep, such narratives can calcify quickly. Hardened by repetition and the social weight of loyalty, Wall expected this. He had seen it work before. The first fist bump had suggested the system was still intact. Brooks filed his report separately. The document Brooks submitted did not hedge. It noted the racial slurs present in the recording, absent from Wall's account. It noted the compliance, both men's hands visible and raised, neither resisting by any standard the footage supported. It identified the stomp for what the physical evidence suggested. Not a push, not a placement, but a strike to the back of the neck region with sufficient force to produce the injuries now being treated at the hospital. Against the supportive report from the first officer on scene, against Wall's own detailed fabrication, Brooks had placed a single, accurate document. It was enough. Internal Affairs received both versions. The gap between them was the case. Here is a question worth sitting with. Do you believe one honest voice can shatter a system built on silence? Drop the word justice in the comments right now if you think accountability begins with a single person willing to tell the truth. Share this story. Let it reach someone who needs to hear it. As the investigation expanded, other patterns began to surface. Prior complaints, prior incidents, a record that Wall's confident demeanor had perhaps counted on remaining buried beneath the institutional tendency to look away. The slurs in the recording were not an aberration in isolation. They pointed toward a pattern. Investigators began pulling the threads. At the hospital, Baskin occupied a bed and kept his own counsel. The injury to his head had aggravated existing damage. A truth he had stated plainly in the parking lot that Wall had dismissed with the same casual authority he had used on everything else that night. Baskin was not dramatic about his circumstances. He had endured worse, in other contexts, under different circumstances, that most people in Greenwood had no frame of reference for. He made phone calls, quiet ones, to people whose names meant something in rooms that Jeffrey Baskin no longer formally occupied. He did not advertise these calls. He did not need to. The people on the other end of the line understood what had happened and what it might mean. Whispers of federal interest began moving through the margins of the case. Too quiet to confirm, too persistent to dismiss. The kind of attention that does not announce itself, but makes itself felt in the questions investigators start asking, and the jurisdiction those questions imply. Whether Baskin's quiet history was the catalyst or simply an accelerant, the case was acquiring a gravity beyond the local. The Bodycam footage, leaked and spreading, was generating the kind of public pressure that transforms a departmental review into something that cannot be quietly resolved. The footage showed what it showed. Every time it played, Wall's version of events lost more ground. Every loop of that recording, Baskin's raised hands, the slur-laced commands, the foot descending, was an argument that required no narration, no editorial framing, no legal expertise to understand. It was plain, it was documented, and it was building, steadily, toward a reckoning. Brooks's report sat at the center of the official record, holding its shape against everything Wall's account had tried to construct around it. One document, one officer, one decision to tell the truth when the easier path was well worn and clearly marked. It was enough to begin the end. 2 days after the incident, the Greenwood Police Department terminated Alton Wall. The decision came quickly by institutional standards, a reflection, in part, of how thoroughly the Bodycam footage had dismantled his account, and in part of how completely Brooks's report had foreclosed the possibility of a credible internal defense. The internal review found no version of events in which Wall's use of force was justifiable under department policy, state law, or the constitutional standard the Supreme Court had articulated in Graham versus Connor decades earlier. The severity of the alleged crime was negligible. Baskin had posed no immediate threat. He had not resisted. The three-factor analysis that any court would eventually apply yielded the same result, no matter which direction the calculation ran. The force was unreasonable. Wall was out. Weeks later, criminal charges arrived. First-degree assault and battery, charges carrying the possibility of significant prison time, filed after prosecutors reviewed the full evidentiary record and concluded that the stomp, documented in full, constituted criminal conduct that exceeded the protected scope of an officer's lawful authority. The charges were not symbolic. They were procedural, methodical, and grounded in footage that left prosecutors with few arguable exits. The federal dimension of the case deepened as the investigation expanded. Baskin's background, the career that had preceded his disability, the federal relationships that had survived it, the institutional memory of people who had worked alongside him in a capacity that Greenwood's parking lot had offered no hint of, quietly reframed the scope of what was being examined. What had begun as a local misconduct matter acquired the character of a pattern investigation. Wall's prior record, his known associates within the department, the culture that had generated that first fist bump and that casual endorsement of appropriate force, all of it came under the kind of scrutiny that federal involvement brings. The inquiry widened. Other incidents surfaced. The case stopped being about one stomp and started being about a system. Baskin did not seek the spotlight. He had operated for years in environments where visibility was a liability, and that discipline had not left him, simply because his circumstances had changed. He engaged with legal proceedings through proper channels, supported by Crawford, who had been present for every moment of the original encounter, and whose account corroborated the footage with the specificity of a witness who had nothing to hide. Together, they moved through the process, without theater, letting the evidence carry the weight that evidence is designed to carry. Brooks received commendation in departmental communications, quiet language, institutional in its restraint, but unambiguous in its meaning. His report had been the fulcrum. The acknowledgement did not overstate it. It did not need to. The outcome spoke with sufficient clarity. The officer who had filed an honest report had been validated by every subsequent development in the case, and the officer who had filed a false one had been fired, charged, and exposed. The legal precedent governing all of it remained Graham versus Connor, a framework nearly 4 decades old, applied with the same logic it had always carried. The Fourth Amendment's reasonableness standard does not bend for uniform or confidence or the speed of a claim filed before the footage is reviewed. It asks what a reasonable officer would have done in the same circumstances, measured against the 3 factors the court identified, and in this case, the answer was the same in every direction. Not this. Under Mississippi's laws governing official misconduct, the lies Wall told to his superiors in his written report, and to Crawford, directly when denying the existence of business cards, constituted a separate category of wrongdoing beyond the physical assault itself. Obstruction of justice, at common law, encompasses any act that impedes or hinders the administration of justice. Misconduct in office applies when a public officer fails to faithfully discharge a duty imposed by law. Wall had done both. The criminal charges reflected it. What the case ultimately demonstrated was the narrow, fragile, but functional mechanism that honest documentation can provide inside a system, otherwise inclined to protect itself. A single, accurate report, not a protest, not a lawsuit, not a leak to media, but a departmental document filed by a sergeant who chose precision over loyalty to a colleague, had been sufficient to initiate and sustain a process that ended with a firing, a criminal charge, and a federal inquiry. The system had not worked easily. It had not worked quickly. But it had worked, and the reason it had worked was one officer's decision to write down what he had actually seen. Wall earns an F for the racial violence, the fabricated reports, the lie about the cards, and the foundational decision to treat a disabled man's compliance as an excuse for aggression. Sergeant Donovan Brooks earns an A+ for the report, for the correction on camera, for the willingness to stand inside a system that rewards silence and choose something harder. Jeffrey Baskin and Peter Crawford are commended for their compliance under impossible conditions, for their methodical pursuit of accountability, and for refusing to allow what happened in that parking lot to be the last word on the matter. The parking lot in Greenwood is unremarkable by day. Cold concrete, ordinary light, the kind of place that holds no particular significance until something happens in it that cannot be undone. Something happened there on December 15th, 2024. It was recorded. And because it was recorded, and because one person chose to document it honestly, it did not disappear the way these things so often do. Justice, in this case, did not arrive as spectacle. It arrived as method, as paperwork, as a sergeant's decision to write the truth in a box on a departmental form. That is, often, what it looks like. Not dramatic, not fast, not guaranteed, but real. If this story stayed with you, let us know in the comments. What do you think should happen next in cases like this one? Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story that matters.